Hi there, this is Yana Smakula for W+9, and thank you for joining me today. I'm a big fan of color layering images, and by color layering, I mean those images that consist of several layers, where you need to stamp each layer using a different color of ink to get a beautiful dimensional result. I'm always looking for ways to stretch my color layering stamps and inks needed to stamp those images. And in my previous video, I shared a technique where one can use white pigment ink to stretch the colors of one ink pad. Today, I'm going to do something different. I will be replacing the top layer of my color layering images with first heat embossing and then foiling. Now, I'm going to start by saying that this is not something that takes very little time. In fact, this is a technique that would probably require you to spend an hour or two in your craft room playing with your supplies. For me, this is what I love to do. And the result you get by doing all the steps is really beautiful, and I think it's so worth it. Now, typically for foiling, you need a laser printer or a toner pen, but we will not be using those products today. I will only use the items that you probably already have in your stash, plus of course foil and a laminator or a foiling machine. I also want to point out that this technique only works for adding accents to your images. You won't be able to foil cinnamons or backgrounds or something large with the help of this technique. Well, you will, but it's not going to look very pretty. So this works great for accenting. I'm going to be using a few different products from W+9. I have fresh cut stamp set along with matching dies, and the reason I chose this particular set is because a lot of the images have that last detail layer in the shape of a dot. And dots are probably easiest to add foiling to with this particular technique. I'm also going to use the Hello die and a sentiment from the hand-lettered Hello set. Another product I'll be using is the Preserves jar die, and I'll be using this one to cut a container for my floral arrangement. Now, I also have the More Fresh Cuts stamp set here. This is also a good option to use for this technique. However, don't limit yourself to just these stamps. There are many other great sets from W+9 that will give you stunning results with this technique. I often like to use something other than paper for my die cuts, so I'm going to use W+9 felt, and I have the wool felt in peach. This felt die cuts beautifully and very smoothly. Even very detailed and intricate dies give you nice die cuts, and I'll be cutting a Hello die out of this one. Now, not all types of felt are like this. There are many different kinds out there, and usually the least inexpensive is the one to cut the worst. I have a few different kinds in my stash, and there are some kinds that I can't die cut even a basic shape out, like a circle or something similar. So if you want to do felt die cutting, I recommend investing into a special type of felt. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be using the Preserves jar die to die cut a container for my flowers. I'm going to cut it out of felt, and I will be cutting two pieces as I'm making two cards today. I will die cut one out of darker peach and one out of lighter peach. I'm also die cutting a lid, and I'm using an opposite color for the lid. But if you will be copying these cards, you really don't need to die cut the lid. It's going to end up being covered with flowers in the end. The only thing that the lid is actually does is it adds a little bit of dimension to the jar, to the top of the jar. And once you adhere your flowers and leaves, the lid will help those to be slightly raised in your project. But that can be easily achieved with foam adhesive. Now, I'm also going to die cut the Hello word out of felt. Again, I will die cut two of those, one out of light peach and one out of dark peach, and I'll be layering those over the jars. So I'll have a light peach hello, or a light peach jar and a dark peach hello. Before I die cut these hellos, I want to add a layer of adhesive to the back of these to make adhering them onto my project a little easier. I like to use scrapbook adhesive sheets. I have a bunch of those in a 4x6 size, and I just trim a piece of this adhesive to the size I need. Now, you can also use a similar product like Stick It from Ken Oliver, or you can skip using this and later use glue to adhere your hello to the project. However, I prefer using this double-sided adhesive as it helps me to stay mess-free, and it really makes adhering smaller detailed objects a very easy task. Now, this cut out beautifully, even the little negative pieces inside the letters H and L, but I'm going to keep the die cut in the main sheet for now, and I will set it aside and we'll come back to it later. I'm going to work on my flowers. Before I go to the foiling part, I need to actually stamp and die cut the flowers and also heat emboss them. Now this particular stamp and die set has solid dies, so you can't align those over the stamped images. Well, you can with the help of a template or with the help of a MISTI stamping tool, but this video is not about that. So I'm going to just quickly show you how I die cut those and how I stamp those. First, I'm using the dies all together. I did not cut them apart. I'm using this set as one big die and cutting it out of white cardstock about 4 times. I'm making more than one card, so I want to have multiples of each image. If you're making just one project, I think you can cut these out once or maybe twice at most. I'm going to sort these die cuts so that I have piles with identical shapes. This will simply make the stamping process go a little faster for me. And once I have those sorted, I'm going to go ahead and do my stamping. I'll be honest with you, usually I first stamp and then align the die on top and then die cut. And it was the first time for me doing things the other way around, meaning first die cutting and then stamping, but I believe I've spent less time working on my images this way. For me, it ended up being a little easier and faster to align the stamp on a white die cut rather than having to align the die cut on a stamped image. Plus, the need to use washi tape to tape the die in place adds extra time to the die cutting process. So this felt like last time to me. I didn't actually time anything, but it did feel like I was spending last time doing things this way. So I'm going to use several colors of ink to stamp the images onto my die cuts. I'm starting with the last leaf and adding green to all of my die cuts that are meant to be green. And once I start stamping, you can see that aligning doesn't take a lot of time and it's pretty accurate too. I actually have more inaccurate die cuts when I align the die on top of the stamped image. So I stamped every type of leaf using the last leaf green ink, and I also stamped the stems of the flowers using the same ink. Stamping probably took the longest, but I was making these for more than one project, and I ended up creating 3 cards in total. I also made one more different card or a different card design with leftover die cuts, and I still have plenty left to use on one more, maybe even 2 more cards. I'm also using Miami Spice and Sweet Nectar inks to add beautiful peach colors to my die cuts. The color combo that I'm going for today is white, peach, yellow, and green, and I'll be adding gold and silver foiled accents later. So I stamped a bunch of flowers in peach and also a bunch more in yellow, and for my yellows I used Hayride and Wild Mango colors of ink. After I stamped my images, I actually walked away for a couple of hours as I had some things to do, and then I came back in about 2 or 3 hours. And the reason I'm mentioning this is only to point out that the ink was already dry on all of these when I came back. I did use dye ink that dries pretty quickly, instantly almost, but since I layered different colors of ink on top of each other, I added more moisture to the paper, and so that took a little longer to dry. It was dry to the touch almost immediately, but it wasn't dry enough for heat embossing. So if you're not taking a break in between the stamping part and the heat embossing part, you might need to dry the ink with your heat tool. Now when you look at the fresh cut stamp set, you can see that a lot of the images have additional third layer, and for most of these that third layer is just a dot that signifies the flower center. Now you can stamp the third layer using a darker color of ink or black ink, or you can heat emboss it, or you can foil it. And I'm going to show you how you can foil it. Usually you would foil over something that is printed on a laser printer or drawn with a toner pen, but you can also foil over heat embossing. Here is a card where I gold foiled the top layer of these images. I also did a second layer for this one flower in the center. It didn't give me the perfect foiling since this was a slightly larger area, but it worked beautifully for foiling these small dots on the flowers. Here's another flower I created where the top layer was gold foiled. It really looks like one of those pre-made and store-bought die cuts, and I think that this tiny bit of foiling takes the die cut to a whole new level. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to use embossing powder as a bonding agent to stick the foil onto the die cuts. I am a little bit of a perfectionist, so I'll use gold embossing powder for images I want to gold foil and platinum embossing powder for images I want to silver foil. I couldn't find my silver embossing powder, so I used platinum instead. As for the foil, I'll be using gold and silver from Heidi Swap from this mini set. And to tell the truth, you really don't need a lot of foil. You'll need just a little piece and you can reuse it for several die cuts as you will only be foiling small sections. You can also use another product as an agent to transfer the foil onto the die cuts, the Stamp and Bond from Stimpendos. Now, I only tested it on the leaves, and while I generally did not like the way I was able to foil the leaves, whether I was using embossing powder or this Stamp and Bond product, it is another good option to use for this technique. Here are the leaves I foiled with the Stamp and Bond. I did add 2 layers of this Stamp and Bond product, and that was a mistake. I should have added just 1 layer, and you can see how much it melted and spread and covered a bigger section that it needed to. So in general, I did not like the way I foiled the leaves, but I did like the way I foiled the little dots on the flowers. I also tested foiling sentiments with embossing powder, and I didn't like the result either, and I'll share these when I get to the sentiment part of this video. So this technique works best if you want to add little dot foiled accents to your die cuts. You can also use a toner pen for this, but if you don't have one, and I don't have one, and if you don't want to get one, you can always foil little bits with embossing powder. Now, the reason embossing powder doesn't work great for detailed images and sentiments is that it creates an embossed or a raised surface. So when you send your heat embossed image through your laminator or foiling machine, that powder gets reheated and it spreads, creating a bigger dot or a bigger line. It works perfectly fine with dots, but when you have a detailed sentiment and that line gets enlarged, you're losing the detail and the final image doesn't look as pretty. This doesn't happen with the laser printed images or toner pen images, as those, when you print or draw with the toner pen, are flat, and when the toner is heated, it doesn't move anywhere. It stays put and it gives you that detailed foiling. So I just wanted to explain a little bit why you can foil with embossing powder, but why that foiling isn't always perfect. Now, instead of foiling, you can just heat emboss your images, but here's a close-up of a foiled and heat embossed die cut. The foiled one looks so much better. The heat embossed looks nice, I like the way it looks, but the foiled one is just, it's just better. So you want to go ahead and heat emboss the top layer on all of the images you want to add foil, and I did that like any regular heat embossing. I prepped my die cuts with an anti-static powder tool. I stamped the images with clear sticky ink. I covered them with embossing powder and heat set it. Again, that took quite a bit of time as I had a bunch of die cuts to heat emboss. And now it's finally time to add those gorgeous foiled accents. Please note, I am in Europe right now, and we have a different electrical system here in Europe, so I'm using a first edition foil applicator. It's just like Mink or any other foil applicator tool that is available in the US, but this one is just manufactured for Europe and for European electrical system. So I'm going to place my die cuts on a sheet of white printer paper that I folded in half, and this will be my sleeve to send the die cuts through the machine. I'm going to cover them with a little piece of foil and let the magic happen. And voila, we have these gorgeous die cuts with gold foiled accents. Now, I did not like the way the leaves turned out, so in the end I mostly used the non-foiled leaves, but the flowers ended up looking stunning. I'm going to place the next batch of images onto my sleeve, add gold foil, and go ahead and foil those. So I kept on foiling my images, and I used gold foil and silver foil for my die cuts, and I mentioned I also foiled the sentiments. I heat embossed several sentiments in gold and platinum embossing powder, and I foiled those, and I really did not like the result. Here's a close-up of those. You can see the detail was really lost. After I had all of my pieces ready, I started putting the card together. First, I adhered the jar lid onto the jar die cut itself, and I used multi-medium adhesive and matte finish to do that. You can also use a specialty felt glue for this. Next, I added a piece of cardstock to the back of the jar. I needed a base to be able to adhere my floral cluster onto, so that's why I added that piece of cardstock. You can skip this and adhere your elements directly onto the card base, but I wanted to be able to move my cluster, so I added that piece of cardstock from the back. Now the rest is fairly simple. I started adding my foiled images to create a beautiful floral arrangement for my card. Now, I always like to shape my die cuts a little bit, so I shaped a lot of them with my fingers to add a bit of dimension to my arrangement. I also used glue and foam adhesive squares as I wanted some of these to be popped up and others to be adhered directly onto the base piece of cardstock. If you use foam adhesive, it adds that natural dimension that the floral arrangement has, and it just looks more pleasing to the eye. Now, I'm not a pro when it comes to making floral arrangements. I really never do any in real life, so I just went with my gut for this card and I alternated the flowers and leaves. I alternated the flower sizes and flower colors and basically just mixed things up. I'm trying to make it not too busy on either side, and I'm just attempting to balance things out here. I'm also going to use a bit of glue to adhere this arrangement onto the card base. And I'm going to adhere the die cut hello, and because I added that layer of adhesive, I can now easily stick it onto the card and overlap the jar with the flowers. As a one last step, I'm going to foam mount the heat embossed sentiment, and that finishes my card. Here's a closer look at all 3 cards that I made with foiled accents. I love the way these turned out, and that foiling added a perfect little touch to these otherwise simple cards. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Be sure to check out wplus9.com for more creative inspiration. See you next time. Bye!